All right, let's begin. Um, Hi everyone, it's a great turnout today, and I'm seeing the chat messages. People from all over the world joining us from Philippines, Ukraine, the US, South Africa. Great to see all you folks joining us. I was just telling the team the other day that this is what really drives us to really come back and put on a great show. Really great to see all of you from all over the globe joining us. I hope you all are safe and healthy. My name is Naren, and I'm part of the marketing team at BrowserStack, and I'm really happy to kickstart this webinar. Once again, thanks for attending. This is what really drives us. There are a couple of housekeeping pointers that I want to go through before we begin the webinar. First, we are recording this webinar, so in case you want to share this with your teammates, keep a lookout for the email from us tomorrow or later today, where we will be sending you the recording. And you will notice that David is not in the panelist. So don't worry, there's a issue with his internet. So he has sent us a recording of the video, but rest assured, he's around. He's trying to join us, and he'll be here shortly to answer your questions live. Uh, we will also be also taking questions towards the end. So please use the Q&A button to give in your. I will see a couple of questions. So please use the button to hand us your questions. Um, and we also have a BrowserStack pack for exclusively for people coming to this webinar. So what it means is you can use that to access all of our products free for 1 month. So I would encourage you to make use of the BrowserStack pack. You should see a link pop up in your chat window in a time now. So with that out of the way, let me just spend a quick couple of minutes before the webinar introducing you to BrowserStack in case you are new to BrowserStack. This is our history, right? BrowserStack was founded 9 years ago by our co-founders Ritesh and Nakul, who were working out of a coffee shop, trying to really, solve the problem that they faced. Right? They were developing on MacBooks, and they needed a place to really test their website on IE, right? And that's how it all started. And within 6 months, BrowserStack had 1,000 paying customers, and the rest is history. Today, we have uh, 4 offices around the world: San Francisco, Dublin, New York, and Mumbai. And we have a base of around 25,000 plus customers. And we have the leaders amongst our customers, people like Microsoft, Twitter, Spotify, Verizon, uh, ESPN, MasterCard, Expedia. The who's who of the world is a customer of BrowserStack. And with their trust, we really have become uh, the de facto testing platform for the internet. Um, Open source tech that powered the internet are also tested on BrowserStack. 5 years ago, we partnered with jQuery, and so since then we have been really working with countless other open source technology, open source projects to give people a way to test uh, their in order to make the internet accessible and compatible. Um, our platform of 2,000 plus browsers and real devices support a massive scale of testing. We have 2 million plus users who test on BrowserStack, and we have 72 billion Selenium commands that are run per month. We have users and customers from 135 plus countries, and our customers run tests across 15 data centers spread across 12 different locations around the globe. And the world's largest cloud providers rely on BrowserStack for testing. And this includes the world's best retailer, the world's search engine, the world's database provider, and the world's best enterprise company. All of these companies pick BrowserStack to run their tests. We also have a few products. Live is the world's leading cross-browser testing tool, which allows developers and QAs to perform interactive manual web testing on 2,000 plus browsers and real devices instantly. Automate is the most reliable automated testing platform on the market. And with Automate, you can run Selenium tests on a high-performance grid for quick feedback. And this includes UA testing, functional and regression testing. We recently acquired Percy, which enables you to deliver pixel-perfect UI with visual testing, integrate Percy with your CI/CD pipeline, and review visual changes with every commit. Uh, App Automate allows QA engineers to execute instant mobile app tests using Appium, Espresso, Xevo Test, and Earl Grey. And App Live provides interactive mobile app testing where you can test your native apps on our iOS and Android, native and hybrid apps on our iOS and Android, devices. So with that out of the way, let's get to the webinar quickly. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen quickly.
Hi everyone. Thank you all for joining us today, and thank you for that introduction. Today we're going to be talking about testing applications. We're going to have a holistic view of everything, and I'm going to try to show you some of the ways that I go about doing this. I hope that you all find this really useful, and with that in mind, let's get the slides started. So today's talk is entitled Holistic View of Testing Applications, learning how to strike the right balance between manual and automated testing. So before we get into that, I'm going to give myself a bit of an introduction. My name is David Burns. I'm a Selenium core contributor. I currently head up the BrowserStack open source team here. I've been a processor engineer, I've been a software tester, I've been a software engineer, I've been a tech lead, I've been an engineering manager. I've kind of done it all. So I've seen quite a bit, and I'm hoping to impart some of that knowledge on you all today. So when we start thinking about testing, one of the first things that tends to come about is, what is the right amount of testing? Should we do the bare minimum? It's an MVP after all. Why can't we just ship it out and see what people say? Or do we need to think about how much risk this could be? Are we at a bank or some finance organization? Do we work in aeronautics? Do we work on medical equipment? The right amount of testing tends to be very different depending on the product that you're working on and the industry you're in. Me creating a website to kind of graph something for me and my colleagues tends to not get a lot of testing. Making sure that aeroplane engines are working as precise as they need to be, and all the software that goes with it is working as precise as it needs to be, that needs a lot of testing. It all comes down to risk. How risky would a release be? Obviously, we need to try and have the least amount of risk, but if your product is not very risky, you can get away with a lot more. So the right amount truly depends on the product that you're shipping, and why you need to think about it, and only you and your engineering managers and kind of your engineering leadership, from kind of software development leaders to kind of testing leaders to security leaders, ops leaders, they're the only ones who can answer that question. Because as Dijkstra said, program testing can only show you the presence of bugs. It can never show you their absence. This is why kind of a lot of people tend to not want testing departments to be called quality assurance. We all know that we can't assure quality, so why call it quality assurance? We can make sure that like it reaches a certain level. Obviously that is fine, and we could maybe assure that, but it's quite easy to miss things. And it's not manual testers can find a lot more bugs, or automated testers can find a lot more bugs. The bugs are always there. We just need to kind of shine a light on them. And we have different lights to do this. So what type of testing do we have to use? Again, this comes down to the product that you're developing. If it's aeronautics, you're probably going to be kind of building your own infrastructure of sorts, like to simulate aeroplanes or simulate the problems that are going to happen. Medical equipment is the same. But if you're developing a mobile app, you just need a mobile device, and you can kind of earn some to do some manual testing. And from there, you could kind of also start doing some automated testing using tools like Appium and Espresso. If you're developing a web application, what about testing with Selenium, testing on multiple browsers? The thing is that we have many ways and many arrows in our quiver that we need to use, and all of them do slightly different jobs, but we need to make sure that we use them together so that we can do something really spectacular. And when we kind of think about what types of testing, this is what tends to pop into people's minds. They see the testing pyramid and they go, right, we need to do this. We've got our unit tests. These are small, succinct tests that kind of test the smallest amount of code that they can. Then you have fewer integration tests than unit tests, and these test the contracts between subsystems or between microservices and things like that. And then we have our end-to-end tests. Typically, these tend to be UI testing, and they will kind of make sure the entire system is up and running, and making sure that, like, if it is a web application, that, you know, if it needs to kind of insert something into a database, it does it, and it does it quickly. But as we can see, there's no mention of manual testing in the pyramid. It tends to be this kind of afterthought, this kind of bubble that kind of sits above, and we go, oh yeah, we should maybe just make sure that things are working as intended. But manual testing should not be an afterthought. It should be something that sits there in our mind, and we need to be kind of making sure that we give as much value to manual testing as we do to automated testing. Yes, it's not manual testing can't sit in a CI system, and you're not going to kind of get that amateurization or in cost of automated test that you get from manual testing. But manual testers tend to find bugs that automated tests don't, and probably never will. This is not a us versus them. We should never think of it that way. Manual testers are very good at their jobs, and automated testers are very good at their jobs. And together, the product tends to excel when it's really well developed. Now, I know some of you are thinking, but David, you do automation. What do you know about exploratory or manual testing? Well, it's quite simple. I can't do automation without doing a little bit of exploratory testing. No automator can. And a few weeks ago, Marit said something that's kind of really powerful. You can't automate well without exploring. You can't explore well without it automating. And what she was meaning, and she wrote this in a blog post entitled "The Automationist's Gambit." I highly recommend that everyone goes and reads it. It's a very good blog post. And she said she was meaning that, like, the two need to work hand in hand. You can't automate well without kind of walking through the system, finding those initial bugs. I know when I write automated tests, especially with Selenium, I need to make sure that kind of the workflow is what I expect. I then also break down what web pages I'm going to be working with and how they're structured so that I can see something. And then I'll start designing my tests and go from there. And I know that kind of if I write really good tests, it gives exploratory testers the ability to start exploring other parts of the system that they might not have had time to do, because manual testing is very time consuming, and they need to explore those other areas, because if they're given the opportunity to find bugs in areas where they've not been able to look properly, they tend to find some really great bugs that kind of could crash systems, or they might find security holes by accident, or not even by accident, but just by kind of having an opportunity to truly look at the system. And so Marit's post, it's up on Twitter, but I highly recommend you read her blog. Really encapsulates this really well. And so I'm going to move on now. So when do you start testing? I know it might seem like a silly question. You start testing after you develop, right? Well, wrong, in my opinion. I'm a big believer in shift left testing. This idea that you kind of move testing as far to the left in a process as possible. So the left being, that's where you start in this case. So we normally see a process of kind of, you do some design, someone will do some development, you'll do some testing, and then you'll do some deployment. If we can move testing to the left, or shift left testing, we can move testing into the area that it kind of can do the most amount of good. Engineers are more likely to kind of be able to fix bugs if a tester was working with them. This could be through pair programming, or kind of pairing for certain amounts of time of a day, or kind of having testers part of your code review cycle, or having testers part of your design process. Every tester that I know has always kind of said, I wanted to be in this during the design. I could have told you all of these bugs that I was going to find before you even started. Same with security, same with ops. The idea of this shift left allows teams to kind of move quicker, but not at the expense of kind of ops work or security or testing. Those are areas that should never be forsaken to kind of gather speed. We need to kind of move as fast as possible, but in a meaningful way, so that we can kind of make sure that we're testing our application, that we're kind of looking for all the problems. Do we make sure that we have accessibility covered? Do we know that the security is covered? Do we know that kind of the application is as performant as possible? Like, have we done performance checks? Like, even just with a cursory look of the eye, like, these are things that are important, but can easily be missed. And because this is about a holistic view, right, we need to make sure that our product is being developed in a meaningful way, in a sustainable way. So by that I mean engineers are not being burnt out, to kind of make sure that our software is being built, and that testing starts at the design phase where possible. When do we stop testing? I guess you're now starting to think that I'm being a little bit flippant. And maybe I am. But when do we stop testing? the truth is that we should never stop testing. We should always be making sure that our applications work as intended. Once it's been deployed, we are likely to find more bugs as we carry on looking through the system, even though people might be constantly developing it. We should not be waiting though to kind of get it into deployment. So this idea that engineers could be twiddling their thumbs or testers in this case, twiddling their thumbs while we wait for engineers to deploy or kind of move things to staging, is kind of archaic, really, in today's society. We need to kind of always be testing from the start to the finish, and the only time we ever stop is when the application is no longer being used or being worked on or being supported. It's important that we learn from all of our testing. Excuse me. That we learn from all of our testing as we go along. Exploratory testers tend to make great notes finding these problems and then pushing them forward. And what they learn from kind of previous projects, they will always take to the next project. So when do we stop testing? Ideally never, or at least when the product is no longer alive. With this in mind, I'm going to start showing you some examples of how I go about going through some manual testing. I'll show you an application that me and my team have been working on recently just to kind of help Selenium users. And we'll go through this process and kind of how I do it, and to make sure that we have a good testing program for this application. So I'm just going to start showing you some examples, and let me load that up now. So hopefully you should be able to see my screen right now. There should just be a little browser. And one of the things that I'm going to kind of walk you through is how I'm going to be testing the Selenium Grid UI. At the moment, with Selenium 4 being worked on quite heavily with my team and other Selenium contributors, we're trying to kind of improve and modernize the UI. So first things first, I will kind of just load up a terminal, and we will just we'll change that to hub. So this is how kind of we're able to start the Selenium server. I wouldn't worry about this too much. This is just so I can get a web server that we can work against. So that's just outputting a bit of information, which is great to make, and there are no errors. So and we can see right at the bottom we have a web server ready for us. Great. The way the Selenium grid works is that it's a grid of computers, or a grid of servers from in a Selenium term, kind of. So this could be the Selenium server that we see running here, and it can be distributed and is horizontally scalable. So kind of if you add more machines, kind of it will redirect requests and things like those to those machines, and allows you to kind of build out your test infrastructure. And so kind of if you've got all the tooling that allows you to build out some of these servers, it would just start up the Selenium server and away you go. So we have that started up, our hub. I think if we just start up a node, and so this will connect to a server, and then hopefully you can see that. I'll just kind of zoom in a little bit. This right at the bottom, that's where it's gone and is ready for us to use. So that we've got all the pieces that we need to kind of do some kind of manual testing, just make sure the UI and see what needs working on. Let's just make sure that it loads up for us. Oh, not Louis Vuitton, but localhost, and we'll just go down, and that's the new grid UI address. If you've been using it before, the old grid UI address will redirect to the new one, so don't worry about it. Great, we have this all loaded. There are a few minimal tests that we have running at the moment. Whenever we work on the grid UI, those all seem to be working. But we've had a few kind of issues where people have kind of asked us to look into and kind of just make sure the UI is working. So in our automated tests are working perfectly. So let's have a look. We have our little ring. This tells us how much of the server is currently being utilized at the moment. Since I'm not running any tests, it's 100% free. We have one node. But one of the things that I'm starting to notice, and because we've already got these automated tests working, is page 1 is not incredibly visible. I don't even know if it's coming up on your screen. There is a 1 there. Comes a bit better when I kind of put the mouse over it. So there's clearly an issue that we need to kind of make sure that it's working. We've got previous and next, but kind of the UI seems to be overflowing really badly. And we even over here, so kind of we just by loading up the web page and kind of doing a minimal amount of exploring, we're starting to hit issues. Slightly harder problems that are kind of also visible, and this tends to be a preference thing. Ideally, this little dot and this should be in the same line. As you can see, they're slightly out of alignment. Again, it's not the biggest problem. But these are kind of a few that just pop up. Let's have a quick look here. It looks like this page has been purely designed for mobile. Okay. I wonder, I've got a possible missing image. Okay. So we've got a few issues. We need to kind of look into it a bit more. But the main thing is that everything's running. And so next thing that we need to do is kind of test this in a few other browsers. Having come from Mozilla, I kind of tend to just have Firefox installed where I go. That's my browser of preference. I know my colleagues might be using Chrome, some might be using Safari. It all kind of depends. But I don't have all the browsers installed on my machine. I don't really see the point these days. But one thing I do have is that if I do need to use these different browsers, is that I can kind of use BrowserStack's live product, and I use it quite extensively. So let me show you what that would look like. So we'll just go load this up. Oh yes, I would like to continue as David. Let's get signed in. I'm very fortunate that kind of it's quite easy to get logged in. A lot of teams have the ability to kind of just have single sign-on and things like that. BrowserStack already supports all of that. But once you're signed in, and fortunately for me, it's kind of put me straight into live. I have a huge repertoire of kind of browsers and operating systems that I can kind of test in. This is really important as it allows us to kind of test on environments that we don't have. And especially nowadays, because like I know in the past, when I managed my own infrastructure, kind of I always had like a VM, or I would have a server that I could kind of connect to, which had VMs running on them, and then be able to just kind of look at it carefully and look what I needed. But with kind of the way with the pandemic and things like that, not everyone can get into the office. Some of the servers that people were able to do those things on are not readily available. They might be behind kind of another layer of firewalls, because you want to kind of keep so much security, and or kind of you work in certain like products, like finance or aeronautics or something like that. Being able to access multiple operating systems that kind of you and your colleagues can access at the same time is important. And so this is where kind of like for the Selenium project, when I'm working, I can kind of just ask other Selenium contributors like, hey, can you just load this up in BrowserStack Live, or kind of if they have the browser themselves, they can see that it's working. So here we have the main dashboard. I have access to kind of Android devices, and a huge raft of them, and I can kind of look at all these different ones. We'll get to that in a minute. Same on iOS, again, a huge raft of them, kind of making sure that we can test on what we think people are going to be using, and that's important. We have Windows, multiple versions of Windows, because kind of different people are stuck on different infrastructure. I know some enterprises up until kind of a year or maybe two ago were still kind of using Windows XP, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's still one or two that are out there still using it. And then finally we have Mac, with a whole raft of different versions of the operating system. And like if you're on say Catalina, you have access to Safari 13. If you're on Mojave, you have access to Safari 12, High Sierra, to 11, and so on and so on. But the main thing that kind of when we're working on the Selenium project is to kind of make sure that we can kind of support some of our end users on some of the kind of slightly older tooling. And so I know that there are people who still kind of have to use IE 11, and make sure that kind of we make sure that the Selenium Grid works there, because they might be working in certain enterprise environments. Not everyone is as fortunate as I am to kind of, have a modern machine with and kind of be allowed to install the browser of my choice. It's going to get my work done. So if we kind of load this up, so we want that one. It's going to load this up. So it's kind of just setting up everything, securing it, creating a fresh virtual environment for me to use. So kind of it's not reusing something that someone else has been using, which is really good. And so I'm just going to kind of talk you through kind of a bit of this. We have the browser itself, and then this pane here on the right, which says switch browser, that allows me to switch to a different browsing session. We have local testing. So one of the nice things that BrowserStack allows is that if I'm working on a web server on my machine, and I need to use a browser on BrowserStack, I kind of need to be able to connect all the way back to my local machine. Local testing allows this. It's just a executable that you install on your machine, you download it once you from kind of when you're logged in, and so I can kind of set a few different things that we might need. In this case, we don't need to set any of it. That's fine. I can set the dimensions of the desktop that I kind of want to check. I can kind of report bugs to Jira, or there's a few other things that we can set up. We use Jira internally, but so kind of in this case, kind of it's just giving me the default for kind of the rest of the company. There are a few settings, so kind of do I want to change the keyboard, or do I want to kind of change my location so that if I was to be testing geolocation, I'll give you a quick look at what that might look in a bit. And then obviously we have stop session, so that's when I'm finished. I can kind of load this up. So we have kind of a UI. We need to kind of get it working to make sure that it works in IE 11 probably, and let's see if it loads. Oh, okay. So the one thing that you'll notice is that kind of it's not given me a 404 message, so it has connected to my local machine. So like if you look in the top left, it says Grid Console. That's the same page. Title is here. Oh, sorry. Here. Those two are working, so there's that. That's fine. Let's have a look and see if we can kind of load up developer tools. So this is going to load up the developer tools on the local machine. Let's just reload the page and see if we can get something else. Oh, okay. It looks like we're kind of using some JavaScript that doesn't work in IE11. Let me make a note of that. That's something that I'm going to have to come back to and make sure that we can get working in a minute. Okay. So let's have a look at the Switch browser. And so if I wasn't going to change it, I can go click back. I've got Firefox locally. I don't need to test that. But I hear a lot of people really like using Edge. We'll just pick Edge 87. Okay, so that's looking better. So that's loaded. And we have all this. One of the things you would have noticed is that it automatically loaded the page for me. So it took the URL that I had been working on in the previous session and started this kind of new session using this version, which is great. And one of the things that you'll notice is that, like, while these automated tests were working, it's found some kind of core problem. Like, they didn't catch any of these core problems that are on the browser side at the moment. So kind of CSS overlays are kind of not working. Again, we have somewhat of an accessibility issue in that we can't see the writing there. Again, got some overflow. Okay. And on there, that's still working the same. Okay, so I think we're going to kind of have to kind of look into this a bit more. Let's go back to the console. So that's working okay. And so on the left here, we have those doc pages. Those go to a different page, so that's why I'm not kind of testing that. We'll go for an iPhone 12. And we'll load up in Safari. There we are. And so we've got, let's move that out of the way. Got everything working. Okay, so one of the things, and don't worry about this too much, is because we're using local and the way iOS works, it was that we've got to kind of do a bit of tweaking to the URL. So that's why it says BS local. It just means that it's kind of going through to localhost. And so it's just BS local instead of localhost. It's just kind of a little quirk to do with iOS, unfortunately. But the main thing is that it's loaded up my local site. The first thing that I've noticed is before, kind of we had this and kind of we can make it smaller, but we've got a random little bit at the top here, and we've got these. So there are kind of, this is a perfect, like this site is a perfect case of where we have a site that is passing all of its automated tests and doing a really fantastic job with its automated tests because we've not noticed anything. But we have problems, we have bugs, and this is kind of, we have end-to-end tests and unit tests in this area. So kind of, this is where if I kind of was, what I was mentioning earlier is that like, we can't just rely on one type of test. Like we can't just rely on manual testing or exploratory testing, because those can be really slow. They might find all the same bugs or find other things, but kind of humans, when kind of they see the same thing over and over and over, can easily kind of gloss over problems. And we should kind of be wary of those situations. When we have automated tests can easily gloss over certain bits because kind of they're not applying the same mental rigor that we do. Like their tests are really good and kind of they make sure that people don't make silly mistakes moving forward. But there are still problems. And they're not catching all of them, and these could be from as I mentioned earlier, like it could be accessibility. So kind of over here there is a 1, but it's not incredibly visible, and it's quite easy for people to not spot this, especially if you have customers or colleagues with kind of vision impairments. They might easily miss these things, so this creates an accessibility issue, and we need to clearly fix that. The UI problems kind of, they just look a bit clunky, and we need to make sure we don't make those mistakes. At least this page mostly is doing the right thing. We have one little bit over here which is kind of overflowing a box, but compared to when we had it looking here, it looks pretty much the same. So I don't even need a device to kind of go retest that when I go back to fixing it. And so we need to kind of make sure that we can kind of get these working. I'm just going to see if we can get that Galaxy S10. On the left, we have some kind of other devices that we can easily move to. I'll pick the slightly smaller device. Aha, there we are. And now we have other problems. So we have scroll bars that kind of are not working. We have a weird thing at the top here. Again, kind of, it should be a bit of a hamburger, but it's not working really well. Let's have a look. Oh, and these are even, makes it even worse. So clearly, me and my team have a lot of work ahead of us. And with that, that's kind of all that I wanted to show you around the application that I've been working on and my talk. So let's move back to our slides. So as we head into kind of Q&A, and my colleagues have been kind of collecting some questions along the way. One of the things that I hope that you take away from this talk and kind of this webinar is that while people can kind of push on one form of testing over another, the reality is that you kind of can't just use one. You have to kind of use a good mix of tooling to get the right products and the right fixes kind of to you. And you need to kind of also not just kind of get stuck in a war of kind of manual versus automation. As I kind of talked earlier, and kind of I'll just put it up because I think it's important that we think about it. You can't automate well without exploring, and you can't explore well without automating. I think this is kind of the quote for 2020, or maybe even beyond. But like, it's important that kind of we think about this as holistic. It's kind of moving testing to the right places that it needs to be, and that we can kind of go from there. So with that, thank you all.
Cool. So David, we have a bunch of questions. I hope you are seeing them too.
Let's try that. Hello, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. Yes, I can see a whole bunch of questions. Thank you so much for everyone putting in your questions, and thank you all for kind of bearing with us for the video. My internet was very unstable earlier today, so I wanted to make sure that like we had something to give you, but it's kind of stabilized out. It's one of the joys of working from home now, I guess, in the new world. I'm happy, Narain, if you want, I can just kind of read off the questions and just kind of go from top to bottom.
Yeah, we could go top to bottom. There are some interesting questions. Very interesting question. Nothing to do with manual testing, but it's about some companies foregoing testing and think it's an added cost, right? So how do you avoid clients that say they don't want to test? Is a third question top.
Yeah, so I don't think it's an added cost in the slightest. I find bugs themselves are an added cost. I find like the main reason I find it an added cost really is that there are two kind of problems. Is that like you can actually have financial bugs that create like issues that cost a company money, and then you have these like intangible costs that bugs can cause, and these are like irreparable damage to one's brand and things like that. So kind of like if we look in the past, and maybe this is an easy example and I shouldn't pick on them, but like if you look at Facebook, like they're notorious for not having testers. They kind of dog like their approach to testing is dog fooding only, or automated testing. But then like they have a lot of like privacy issues that kind of creep out, or they did in the past, and that it impacted their brand and things like that. And kind of, you know, I know they do other notorious things, but kind of nowadays, but people still think of like those problems. You know, Twitter had the similar thing where they had cross-site scripting and other security problems where they weren't kind of doing these types of tests. Like they didn't have a good breadth of testing. So testing is not a cost. It's one of these things that like it seems expensive to start it, but once you start doing it, the cost of it actually comes down quite quickly. It amortizes quite nicely, especially in automation. But like even in manual testing, exploratory testing, kind of catching those core bugs is important.
Cool. Which role is the best candidate to derive unit tests, dev or test, or even both?
I think both. So I kind of mentioned earlier that there's this kind of concept of shift left testing. So kind of where you have your, if you think of it like your design, your development, your testing, and your deployment, which is kind of your general waterfall, but kind of agile somehow fits into that. The idea is moving everything left. And so the further you get it to the left, the better. And so kind of it doesn't necessarily need to be unit testing. It could be any type of testing. The sooner you get it to the left, the better. And this could be, you know, unit testing, manual testing, automated testing, security testing. Like these, like security work is another form of testing. So it's kind of like getting those all to the left improves the quality. And so the sooner you start, the better.
Got it. Um, do you see manual testers and automation testers as two separate entities, or do you think manual testers should always have high-level automation skills?
I see them as two different groups. Like your automation engineers tend to be kind of they understand the code, they can write things like that. But exploratory testers tend to understand your customers, and they get a better idea for this. And like, you know, they tend to be, in my experience, and maybe I've just been incredibly fortunate, is that a lot of them tend to be incredibly empathetic towards customers. And so kind of getting that empathy across to kind of get a better product will always get you a better product. And so kind of which this is why I mentioned before, like I don't believe there's a war of kind of manual testers versus automation or things like that. It's like you need all of it. It all depends on how much obviously you can afford as a company, but it's not something that I think you should cut corners on, because I think it ultimately at the end of the day it's going to impact you.
Got it. There are a couple of questions about how much do we automate? Is 20%, 80% of the total number of test cases?
There's a really good phrase in the UK is kind of how long is a piece of string, to kind of questions that, like, you know, to these, because like the real answer is how much risk you want to take. So automation, you should do as much as you feel is going to limit the risk of your product releasing bugs, right? And so kind of, if you think of the concepts around MVP, the minimum viable product, some people kind of take it too much to the extreme, and where like a minimum viable product, like if you think of a car, like you eventually want to get to a car, is that you'll start with a wheel. Like, but it's better if you start with a skateboard because it has four wheels like a car and it moves, and a wheel kind of you have no control of. So if you have a skateboard, like if you think of it as a skateboard, and then from skateboard you might grow to a bicycle, and then you'll add an engine and a motorbike, and then you kind of add more wheels, you go back to 4 wheels again, you've got a car. Like, it's all about how you can facilitate that type of growth in your application, that it makes like it improves your product. And so how much percent, I don't know. It's up to the kind of the team looking after the product, but it's like whatever facilitates that kind of general movement, that kind of, while you're still doing that minimum viable product, you're still producing high quality products, and doing it small and incrementally up.
So very similar question. In your opinion, what should we automate and what should be test manual?
So automate should be about kind of your generic flows, data flows. So kind of from a unit test, like, is the data going in, producing the correct output? If you got integration tests, like, do these contracts between these two subsystems? So it could be between two microservices, or just kind of two objects, really. Like, do the contracts maintain what they should be doing? This is especially important in languages that are not strongly typed, because like it's easy to for subtle bugs to go through. And then, like, with end-to-end testing, I think we need to think of that as how few could we get away with that is important, like that will kind of still produce a high quality product. The reason being is that, like, the longer your test is running, the higher the chances are of a test becoming flaky. And so kind of if you get that, like, kind of that balance right, then that gives you kind of all those parts on kind of done really well, and you're amortizing your cost back in with your test. It allows your exploratory testers to kind of go shine those lights. They're little flashlighters, kind of like the analogy that I tend to use is that, like, they're looking for the little cracks, because bugs are always in the software, no matter what. Testers shine their lights, and they look for the cracks, and then they kind of peel them apart. And so it's, if you kind of have a decent amount of tests, automation tests, you have a whole new area that you could be building out with manual testing or exploratory testing. And as you fix those areas, you might be able to build more automation tests that give you more area to go explore. And this is why I really, really like Marip's quote, is that, you need to explore well to automate, and you need to automate to explore well. Like, it kind of, the two go hand in hand. And so as you kind of have this backup, the safety nets, you can go forth and, like, explore more and get those harder areas to find.
Your, we have 2 more minutes and we have 70 plus questions.
Oh dear.
So here's what I suggest. So, we will try to write up a blog post with
Definitely.
a bunch of these questions, and we will also give you the link. But David, meanwhile, do you see an interesting question that you think you would want to ask now? There are a few questions about bug filing while manual testing. With BrowserStack Live, we have integrations with a few bug filing tools like Jira and even GitHub, so you can use those. Um,
There were so, like, one of the questions I saw was about kind of like I can't see it now. I saw it like the questions flooded in, so I do apologize. Was about, like, how do you keep notes while you're exploring? And a lot of the time, kind of, I have a little shorthand that I do when I'm kind of writing it out. The main reason is that, like, whenever I write a bug report to someone, this could be for one of the engineers who report to me, like, hey, these are the steps you need to do. I need to be able to give them steps to reproduce it, so that they're coming into it cold. So like the kind of, I've seen it a lot in a lot of projects where kind of testers will just say this thing's broken, and it's like, oh, actually, how do you get to that point? I forget how to do that, like getting those things. And so I kind of write extensive notes. I carry a little notebook. I do it old fashioned. I have pen and paper, and then I transpose that into a bug report. And so like you can kind of do that with live. Like if I was using Jira, I could have shown you. And possibly I should have done that, but like the main thing is kind of keeping these detailed notes, like step, and you can kind of, once you have it, you can kind of just loop over them type of thing. It's like, oh, when I type this type of data, this is what went wrong. My favorite in the past was always kind of putting the Unicode snowman in and seeing how that broke systems, because somewhere along the line something wouldn't have been UTF-8, and then like all hell breaks loose, and it's really fun to watch those bugs.
Cool. Hey folks, you would have seen a link in the chat window, a SurveyMonkey link. We would love your feedback. That's what really makes us better, and really help us get better with our webinars. David, one last question. Sorry, I know you're out of time. In fact, more than a couple of questions about people wanting to learn automated testing. What would you advise? And there was a specific question about which language would you recommend people get started off with?
So the language one I find really easy. I would always recommend people start with Python. It's my favorite language, but but I would always start with Python. It's really simple to kind of get started. If not, I would start with Ruby. The main reason is that you don't necessarily need to understand all the boilerplate that goes with other languages like Java or .NET. Kind of starting simple, and like Ruby and Python allow you to do things in a command prompt, and you can kind of start stuff up. I might kind of see if we can get like if I can record a video just showing some people. But there's also a few colleagues of mine within BrowserStack. We kind of see if we can create some learning material to share out to people to get started in automation. Because like automation is useful, and I think it's useful for teams. I think people get companies and management, I've seen it in the past, can kind of get stuck like, oh, you know how to automate, we don't need to do that manual, or kind of, can you do these manual tests quickly and then you can do automation later, and then kind of eventually you never do any automation because you're just kind of on top of your manual and kind of time always runs out. But we're trying to create like colleagues of mine are trying to create some documentation that we can share out and help you all in the future, so that you can kind of learn and do things and go from there.
Awesome. Cool. Great. We are 2 minutes over time. So thanks, David. Thanks for that. That was really helpful and useful. We should do this again. And thanks to all of you for joining us. It's wonderful seeing you again. And stay safe, stay indoors, wear a mask, and see you folks next webinar. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.